Okay, chapter 12, puzzle pieces fitting demiş, devam ediyoruz da. Toward the end of the summer, I accidentally overheard a conversation that shook me out of my state of blissful ignorance. When we are children, we seldom think of the future. This innocence leaves us free to enjoy ourselves as few adults can. The day we fret about the future is the day we leave our childhood behind. It was evening, and the troop was camped by the side of the road. Ebenty had given me a new piece of sympathy to practice. The maximum of variable heat transferred to constant motion falan. Bayağı böyle uzun bir adı var diyoruz. Or something pretentious like that falan. Claude da bunun vurgusunu yapıyor. Ben de bilmiyorum ama da o kadar uzun ki falan diyor. Devam diyoruz. It was tricky, but it had fallen into place like a puzzle piece fitting. It had taken about 15 minutes, and from Benty's tone, I guessed he had expected it to take 3 or 4 hours at least falan. Uşağımız yine genius'ı diyoruz, onun vurgusunu yapıyor burada, okay diyoruz. So I went looking for him, partly to get my next lesson, and partly so that I could be just a little bit smart. I tracked him down to my parents' wagon. I heard the three of them long before I saw them. Their voices were just murmurs, the distant music that a conversation makes when it's too dim for words. But as I was coming close, I heard one word clearly, Chandrian. I pulled up short when I heard that. Everyone in the troop knew my father was working on a song. He'd been teasing out stories and rhymes from townsfolk for over a year wherever we stopped to play. For months, it was stories about Leonard. Then he started gathering old fairy stories too, legends about bogies and shamblemen. Then he began to ask questions about the Chandrian. That was months ago. Over the last half year, he had asked more about the Chandrian and less about Leonard, Lyra diye okunuyor sanırım, and the rest. Most songs my father set to writing were finished in a single season, where this one was stretching toward its second year falan. Okay diyoruz. Şu sayfaya bakıp geliyorum, bundan önceki sayfaya. Devam diyoruz. You should know this as well. My father never let word or whisper of a song be heard before it was ready to play. Only my mother was allowed into his confidence, as her hand was always in any song he made. The cleverness in the music was his. The best words were hers. When you wait a few span or month to hear a finished song, the anticipation adds savor. But after a year, excitement begins to soar. By now, a year and a half had passed, and folk were almost mad with curiosity. This occasionally led to hard words when someone was caught wandering a little too close to our wagon while my father and mother were working. So I moved closer to my parents' fire, stepping softly. Eavesdropping is a deplorable habit, but I have developed worse ones since demiş. Deplorable derken olmasa daha iyi olur gibisinde bir anlamda diyor bence. Diyorum, şuna bir bakıyoruz. İçler acısı acınacak, acınacak halde falan, aynen öyle diyoruz. Much about them I heard Ben say, but I'm willing. I am glad to talk with an educated man on the subject. My father's strong baritone was a contrast to Ben's tenor. I am weary of these superstitious country folk. And derken, someone added wood to the fire, and I lost my father's verse in the crackling that followed. Stepping as quickly as I dared, I moved into the long shadow of my parents' wagon. Like I'm chasing ghosts with this song. Trying to piece together this story is a fool's game. I wish I'd never started it. Nonsense, my mother said. This will be your best work, and you know it. So you think there is an original story all the others stem from? Ben asked. A historical basis for Leonard? All the signs point to it, my father said. It's like looking at a dozen grandchildren and seeing 10 of them have blue eyes. You know, the grandmother had blue eyes too. I've done this before. I'm good at it. I wrote below the walls the same way, but I heard him sigh. What's the problem then? The story is older, my mother explained. It's more like he's looking at great-great-grandchildren. And they're scattered to the four corners, my father groused. And when I finally do find one, it's got 5 eyes, 2 greens, a blue, a brown, and a chartreuse demiş. Merak ettim hangi renk bu? Ne olabilir? Ela değil. Sanki Ela Hazer gibi bir şey miydi? Yanlış mı biliyorum? Bakıyoruz. Kiralama demiş. A pale green or yellow liquor made from brandy and aromatic herbs demiş. A dish made in a mold using pieces of meat, vegetables or most often fruit in jelly demiş. Yeşil sarının arasında olan bir renk. I don't know. Diyorum. Devam ediyoruz. Then the next one has only one eye and it changes colors. How am I supposed to draw conclusions from that? Ben cleared his throat. A disturbing analogy, he said, but you're welcome to pick my brain about the Chandrian. I heard a lot of stories over the years. Diyor. Sayfa bitiyor. Bundan önceki sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Devam diyorum. The first thing I need to know is how many there actually are, my father said. Most stories say 7, but even that's conflicted. Some say 3, others 5, and in Failures Fall there are a full 13 of them, one for each pontificate, diyeceğim in author, and an extra for the Capitol. That I can answer, Ben said. 7. You can hold to that with some certainty. It's part of their name, actually. Chain means 7. Chandrian means 7 of them. Chandrian. I didn't know that, my father said. Chain. What language is that? English? Sounds like Tema, my mother said. You got a good ear, Ben said to her. It's Temic, actually. Predates Tema by about 1,000 years. Well, that simplifies things, I heard my father say. I wish I'd asked you a month ago. I don't suppose you know why they do what they do. I could tell by my father's tone that he didn't really expect an answer. That's the real mystery, isn't it, Ben chuckled. I think that's what makes them more frightening than the rest of the bogeyman you hear about in stories. A ghost wants revenge, a demon wants your soul, a shambleman is hungry and cold. It makes them less terrible, things we understand we can try to control. But Chandrian come like lightning from a clear blue sky, just destruction, no rhyme or reason to it. My song will have both, my father said with grim determination. I think I dug up their reason after all this while. I tease it together from bits and pieces of story. That's what's so getting about this, to have the harder part of this done and have all these small specifics giving me such trouble. You think you know, Ben said curiously. What's your theory? My father gave a low chuckle. Oh no, Ben, you'll have to wait with the others. I sweated too long over this song to give away the heart of it before it's finished. Falan ağlayasımız geliyor tabii buralarda çünkü büyük ihtimal cevabı buldu diyoruz. Bu cevabı 2 kitap sonunda da edinmiş olmuyoruz gibi bir şey by the way. Yoksa edinmiş oluyoruz mu tam emin değilim de. Neyse yani bu cevabı için senelerde bekleyen bir sürü fanlar var. En son kitap 2010'da çıkmış olsa 2022'deyiz. 12 yıl geçmiş hala 3. kitap çıkmamış falan. Öyle. I could hear the disappointment in Ben's voice. I'm sure this is all just an elaborate ruse to keep me traveling with you, he groused. I won't be able to leave until I've heard the blackened thing. Then help us finish it, my mother said. The Chandrian signs are another key piece of information we can't nail down. Everyone agrees there are signs that warn of their presence, but nobody agrees on what they are, demiş. Yeni sayfaya geçiyoruz. Şu sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Devam diyorum. Let me think, Ben said. Blue flame is obvious, of course, but I'd hesitate to attribute that to the Chandrian in particular. In some stories, it's a sign of demons. In others, it's fake creatures or magic of any sort. It shows bad air in mines too, my mother pointed out. Does it, my father asked. She nodded. When a lamp burns with a blue haze, you know there is fire damp in the air. Good Lord, fire damp in a coal mine, my father said. Blow out your light and get lost in the black, or leave it burn and blow the whole place to flinders. That's more frightening than any demon. I also admit to the fact that certain arcanistas occasionally use prepared candles or torches to impress gullible townsfolk, Ben said, clearing his throat self-consciously. My mother laughed. Remember who you're talking to, Ben. It never hold a little showmanship against a man. In fact, blue candles would be just the thing the next time we play Vonica diyeceğim. If you happen to find a couple tucked away somewhere, that is. I see what I can do. Ben said, his voice amused. Other signs, one of them is supposed to have eyes like a god, or no eyes, or black eyes. I heard that one quite a bit. I heard that plants die when the Chandrian are around. Wood rots, metal rusts, brick crumbles. He paused. Though I don't know if that's several signs or all one sign. You begin to see the trouble I'm having, my father said morosely. Okey, burada bize ipucunu verdi ama burayı sayfayı bitirdikten sonra düşünüp devam edeceğim. Şu an önce sayfayı bitiriyorum. And there is still the question as to if they all share the same signs or have a couple each, demiş. I told you, my mother said, exasperated. One sign for each of them. It makes the most sense. My lady wife's favorite theory, my father said, but it doesn't fit. In some stories, the only sign is blue flame. In others, you have animals going crazy and no blue flame. In others, you have a man with black eyes and animals going mad and blue flame. I told you how to make sense of that, she said, her irritated tone indicating they'd had this particular discussion before. They don't always have to be together. They could go out in threes or fours. If one of them makes fires dim, then it'll look the same as if they all made the fires dim. That would account for the differences in the stories, different numbers and different signs depending on how they've grouped together. My father grumbled something demiş. Sayfa bitiyor. Şu sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Yani şurayı düşündüm. You begin to see the trouble I'm having dediği yer. Yani burayı sayfayı bitirdikten sonra düşüneceğim dediydim falan. Ama bir şey gelmedi aklıma diyorum. Bakmaya devam ediyorum. Devam diyorum. That's a clever wife you got there, Arl. Ben spoke up, breaking the tension. How much will you sell her for? I need her for my work, unfortunately. But if you're interested in a short-term rental, I'm sure we could arrange a yes derken. There was a fleshy thump followed by a slightly pained chortle in my father's baritone. Any other signs that spring to mind falan. Bu sırada herhalde bu Quote'un annesi babasına vuruyor falan, onun için babasının sesi şey diyor falan. Okay diyoruz. Any other signs that spring to mind? They're supposed to be cold to the touch. Though how anyone could know that is beyond me. I heard that fires don't burn around them. Though that directly contradicts the blue flame. It could derken. The wind picked up, stirring the trees. The rustling leaves drowned out what Ben said. I took advantage of the noise to creep a few steps closer, being yoked to shadow, whatever that means. I heard my father say as the wind died down. Ben grunted. I couldn't say either. I heard a story where they were given away because their shadows pointed the wrong way toward the light. Then there was another where one of them was referred to as shadow hamed. It was something the shadow hamed. Damned if I can remember the name though falan. Speaking of names, there's another point I'm having trouble with, my father said. There are a couple dozen I've collected that I'd appreciate your opinion on. Damos, actually, Arl, ben interrupted. I'd appreciate it if you didn't say them out loud. Names of people, that is. You can scratch them in the dirt if you'd like, or I could go fetch a slate. But I'd be more comfortable if you didn't actually say any of them. Better safe than sorry, as they say falan. Okay diyor, bir şey söylemiyorum. Burada, there was a deep piece of silence. I stopped mid-sneak with one foot off the ground, afraid they'd heard me. Now don't go looking at me like that, either of you, Ben said testily. You're just surprised, Ben, came my mother's gentle voice. You don't seem the superstitious type. I'm not, Ben said. I'm careful, there's a difference. Of course, my father said. I never derken. Save it for the paying customers, Al. Ben cut him off, irritation plain in his voice. You're too good an actor to show it, but I know perfectly well when someone thinks I am daft. I just didn't expect it, Ben, my father said apologetically. You're educated, and I'm so tired of people touching iron and tipping their beer as soon as I mentioned the Chandrian. I'm just reconstructing a story, not meddling with dark arts, demiş. Sayfa bitiyor. Sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Okay, babası diyor ki being yoked to shadow whatever that means yapıyor. I heard my father say as the wind died down demiş. Şu yoktu kelimesine bakıp bu konuda düşünmek istiyorum diyorum. Onun için yazdım. Boyunduruk bağlamak, boyunduruğa koşmak, evlendirmek, koşmak demiş. Yok demiş sadece, bir şuna bakalım. Boyunduruk, bağ, evlilik bağı, çift, satıcı olmuş sırrı, bağlanmak, boyunduruğa koşmak, evlendirmek, koşmak demiş. Bunu bir düşünüp geliyorum. Bu yok, ekstradan bir yorumum yok. Bakmaya devam ettim, şunu gördüm. Bu ben diyor ki, and there was another where one of them was referred to as shadow hamed demiş. Şu hame kelimesine bakmak istiyorum. Bir dakika, niye çıkmadın? Hamed desek falan da mı çıkmıyorsun? Jesus Christ, onun nasıl çıkmaz lan? Buna bakıp geliyorum. Yani şöyle bir şey buldum. One of the two curved supports attached to the collar of a draft horse, to which the traces are fastened falan. Bir şekilde aklıma ilk gelen şey ata binen insanların ayaklarını koydukları, ata bağladıkları kısımlar geldi. İkinci olarak da to which the traces are fastened demiş. Hani bütün trace'lerin fastenladığı yer atın boyunlu taraflarında falan bir şey oluyordu sanki. O tarz bir şey geldi. Bu hesap geri dönünce shadow hand denince bir şekilde shadow'u öyle bir kullanıyor ki, ya da shadow onu bir şekilde kısıtlıyor. Biz nasıl böyle atı belli bir seviyeye kadar kısıtlayıp ona binebilecek bir hale geliyoruz. Burada da shadow bir şekilde bu Chandler'lardan bir tanesini hame'liyor bir seviyeye kadar gibi anlayasım geldi. But not sure. Bakmaya devam ediyorum. Okay, devam diyorum. Well, hear me out. I like both of you too well to let you think of me as an old fool, Ben said. Besides, I have something to talk with you about later, and I'll need you to take me seriously for that. The wind continued to pick up, and I used the noise to cover my last few steps. I edged around the corner of my parents' wagon and peered through a veil of leaves. The three of them were sitting around the campfire. Ben was sitting on a stump, huddled in his frayed brown cloak. My parents were opposite him, my mother leaning against my father, a blanket draped loosely around them. Ben poured from a clay jug into a leather mug and handed it to my mother. His breath fogged as he spoke. How did they feel about demons off in Utter, he asked. Scared, my father tapped his temple. Şöyle scared, böyle mi yapıyor? All that religion makes the brain soft. How about off in winters, Ben asked. Fair number of them are tehlins. Do they feel the same way? My mother shook her head. They think it's a little silly. They like their demons metaphorical. What are they afraid of at night in winters, then? The Fae, my mother said. My father spoke at the same time. Draugr. You're both right, depending on which part of the country you are in, Ben said. And here in the Commonwealth, people laugh up their sleeves at both ideas. He gestured at the surrounding trees, but here they're careful come autumn time for fear of drawing the attention of shamble men. That's the way of things, my father said. Half of being a good trooper is knowing which way your audience leans. You still think I've gone cracked in the head, Ben said, amused. Listen, if tomorrow we pulled into Byron and someone told you there were shamblemen in the woods, would you believe them? My father shook his head. But if two people told you, another shake. Ben leaned forward on his thumb. What if a dozen people told you, with perfect earnestness, that shamblemen were out in the fields, eating? Of course, I wouldn't believe them, my father said, irritated. It's ridiculous. Of course it is, Ben agreed, raising a finger. But the real question is this. Would you go into the woods? My father sat very still and thoughtful for a moment. Güzel dedi bence diyoruz. Şu sayfaya bir bakıp geliyorum. Devam diyorum. Ben nodded. You'd be a fool to ignore half the town's warning, even though you don't believe the same thing they do. If not shamblemen, what are they afraid of? Bears, bandits. Good sensible fears for a trooper to have, Ben said. Fears that townsfolk don't appreciate. Every place has its little superstitions, and everyone laughs at what the folk across the river think. He gave them a serious look. But have either of you ever heard a humorous song or story about the Chandrian? I bet a penny you haven't. My mother shook her head after a moment's thought. My father took a long drink before joining her. Now, I'm not saying that the Chandrian are out there, striking like lightning from the clear blue sky, but folk everywhere are afraid of them. There is usually a reason for that. Ben grinned and tipped his clay cup, putting the last drizzle of beer out onto the earth. And names are strange things, dangerous things. He gave them a pointed look. That I know for true, because I am an educated man. If I am a mite superstitious too, he shrugged. Well, that's my choice. I'm old. You have to humor me. My father nodded thoughtfully. This odd I never noticed that everyone treats the Chandrian the same. It's something I should have seen. He shook his head as if to clear it. We can come back to names later, I suppose. What was it you wanted to talk about? I prepared to sneak off before I was caught, but what Ben said next froze me in place before I took a single step. It's probably hard to see, being his parents and all, but your young coat is rather bright. Ben refilled his cup and held out the jug to my father, who declined it. As a matter of fact, bright doesn't begin to cover it, not by half. My mother washed Ben over the top of her mug. Anyone who spends a little time with the boy can see that, Ben. I don't see why anyone would make a point of it, least of all you. I don't think you really grasp the situation, Ben said, stretching his feet almost into the fire. How easily did he pick up the lute? My father seemed a little surprised by the sudden change of topic. Fairly easily, why? How old was he? Diyor, sayfa bitiyor, şu sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Devam diyorum yeni sayfadan. My father tugged thoughtfully at his beard for a moment. In the silence, my mother's voice was like a flute. 8. Think back to when you learned to play. Can you remember how old you were? Can you remember the sort of difficulties you had? My father continued to tug on his beard, but his face was more reflective now, his eyes far away. Ebanti continued. I bet he learned each chord diye okunuyor sanırım. Each fingering after being shown just once. No stumbling, no complaining. And when he did make a mistake, it was never more than once, right? My father seemed a little perturbed, mostly, but he did have trouble, just the same as anyone else. Each word. He had a lot of trouble with greater and diminished E. My mother broke in softly. I remember too, dear, but I think it was just his small hands. He was awfully young. I bet it didn't stall him for long, Ben said quietly. He does have marvelous hands. My mother would have called them magician's fingers. My father smiled. He guessed them from his mother, delicate but strong, perfect for scrubbing pots, woman falan bir yandan da laf atıyor böyle. My mother sweated him, then caught one of his hands in her own and unfolded it for Ben to see. He guessed them from his father, graceful and gentle, perfect for seducing young nobles' daughters falan. Yine böyle esprili konuşuyorlar diyoruz. My father started to protest, but she ignored him. With his eyes and those hands, there won't be a woman safe in all the world when he starts hunting after the ladies. Courting, dear, my father corrected gently. Böyle şey mi etti? Anlatım bozukluğu gibi bir şey mi yapıyorsun? Etti. Bakıp geliyor. Anlamadım, devam diyorum. Semantics, she shrugged. It's all a chase, and when the race is done, I think I pity woman chased who run. She leaned back against my father, keeping his hand in her lap. She tilted her head slightly, and he took his cue, leaning in to kiss the corner of her mouth. Amen, Ben said, raising his mug in salute. My father put his other arm around her and gave her a squeeze. I still don't see what you're getting at, Ben. He does everything that way, quick as a whip, hardly ever makes mistakes. I bet he knows every song you ever sung to him. He knows more about what's in my wagon than I do. He picked up the jug and uncorked it. It's not just memorization, though. He understands. Half the things I've been meaning to show him, he's already figured out for himself. Ben refilled my mother's cup. He's 11. Have you ever known a boy his age who talks the way he does? A great deal of it comes from living in such an enlightened atmosphere. Ben gestured to the wagons. But most 11-year-olds also deepest thoughts have to do with skipping stones and how to swing a cat by the tail falan. Konuşmaya devam ediyor diyoruz. Sayfaya bakıp geliyorum. Devam diyorum. My mother laughed like bells, but Abanti's face was serious. It's true, lady. I've had older students that would have loved to do half as well. He grinned. If I had his hands and 1/4 his width, I'd be eating off silver plates inside a year. There was a lull. My mother spoke softly. I remember when he was just a little baby, toddling around, watching, always watching, with clear, bright eyes that looked like they wanted to swallow up the world. Her voice had a little quaver in it. My father put his arm around her and she rested her head on his chest. The next silence was longer. I was considering sneaking away when my father broke it. What is it you suggest we do? His voice was a mix of mild concern and fatherly pride. Ben smiled gently, nothing except to think about what options you might give him when the time comes. He will leave his mark on the world as one of the best. The best what? My father rumbled. Whatever he chooses. If he stays here, I don't doubt he will become the next Ilyevan demiş. My father smiled. Ilyevan is the true person's hero, the only truly famous Edamaru in all of history. All our oldest, best songs are his songs. What's more, if you believe the stories, he even reinvented the lute in his lifetime. A master luthier, it even transformed the archaic, fragile, unwieldy court lute into the marvelous, versatile, seven-string troopers lute we use today. The same stories claim Ilian's own lute had 8 strings in all. Ilian, I like that thought, my mother said. Kings coming from miles away to hear my little cloth play. His music stopping barroom brawls and border wars. Ben smiled. The wild woman in his lap, my father enthused, laying their breasts on his head. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then my mother spoke slowly with an H to her voice. I think you mean wild beasts laying their heads in his lap. Dua falan yine böyle esprileşmeye başladılar diyor sanırım. Ben called and continued. If he decides to become an arcanist, I bet he'll have a royal appointment by the time he's 24. If he gets it into his head to be a merchant, I don't doubt he'll own half the world by the time he dies. My father's derken o kadar dalmışım ki unutmuşum. Yeni sayfaya geçmiş. Bakıp geliyorum. Uykum var bayağı bir. Devam edebilecekmiş gibi düşünmüyorum kendimi. Şu sayfayı okuduk. Şu sayfaya ben bakacağım. Olmadı diğer videonun başında bu sayfa hakkında diyecek bir şeyim varsa onu konuşuruz. Onun dışında diğer sayfaya devam ederiz diyorum. Kendinize iyi bakın. Görüşürüz.